Welcome to class today, everybody. So let's start by answering any questions you may have from quizzes or from the last two lectures, or last three lectures, I guess. I emailed everybody a couple different resources, well, actually 4 reference sheets. Right now when you're starting your quiz. And the most important one, as I said in the email, is the nerve roots reference sheet. Because as I said last time, there are discrepancies from various sources with the nerve roots for various muscles. As far as origin insertion, you can get that information right out of your textbook for anatomy exams, written exams, quizzes, whatever. And then next week will be our first of 3 mini practicals, which is just really you'll work in groups, and I emailed you those groups. And so it's just kind of a practice run for, at the end of my time, I'll do an anatomy exam and a written exam, and we'll do the MMT range of motion competencies all on week 9. That's my last week with you. And then so I'll have 2 of those mini practicals, one next week basically to cover the spine, and then one right towards the end to cover I think in the week 8 when we do posture and gait, we'll do that other second mini practical to cover pelvis, knee, hip, knee, foot, and ankle. And so it's really kind of a way for you to get used to the format, and you can work in small groups, so it's very low stakes. I mean, there is a grade, it's pass-fail, and I think all 3 of those added together have a certain amount of points attached to them. So that should be easy money, as they say. There should be no reason why you can't get all those points, and then hopefully that will prepare you for the exam when you're on your own. So any questions about that? Okey-doke. Whenever there are 0 questions, I wonder, am I being way too easy or way too hard? As I said to you many times, the assumption is that a lot of this is review on one level or another, and probably the difference would be now at the grad school level we'll go into a little more depth and maybe have some more expectations for details, but anatomy is anatomy, oinas are oinas, and the muscles and bones and nerves don't change. So today we'll talk about thoracic spine and lumbar spine. Yes?
On when you write the grades for documentation, anyway, how do you write that again? Was it 0, like the flexion?
Oh, the range of motion?
Yeah. 0?
Yeah, so if you're measuring elbow flexion, you would say 0 to 120 degrees of elbow flexion.
When you're lacking, that's when you
right. So if somebody has, they can't get to full extension, so they can't get to 0, so it would be minus 10 to 120 degrees.
Just check.
Yeah. And then, as we said also, with elbow extension, knee extension, often there is hyper extension, so you could if you just write the word hyperextension, 4 degrees, 8 degrees, everyone's going to know what you're talking about. Thank you. A question. Yay. Any other questions? All right. JD has 1 gold star. The rest of you have none for today. So there will be a lot of duplication in this lecture because in our cervical spine lecture last week, there was a lot of general facts related to ligaments in the spine and so forth. So we'll have a few of these that we'll kind of go past. And we referred quite a bit to the thoracic and the lumbar spine last week as well. One thing we're going to do today when we're done with the 2 lectures, thoracic and lumbar, for our lab portion, we're going to do palpation, and we'll do surface anatomy, and so then I'll bring out those. The other thing I emailed all of you that we haven't spoken about were based on JD's question. That's another gold star, too. To kind of give you a list of all the oina muscles that you're responsible for. So if you have questions about that, let me know. There are, I think, 2, maybe 3 muscles where I just know the attachments, like scalenes I know is one. So you don't really have to have innervation and action, but just know where they attach. Yeah.
Is that for the mini practical or for the bigger?
Everything. Yeah. I mean, all that stuff, the oinas, and on those anatomy modules, there's more than just muscles. Of course, there's structures and bony landmarks and all of that you're responsible for. I just wanted to be real specific with the oinas, so you knew which muscles you didn't need to try to track down the innervation. A lot, like the scalenes is a good example. It's kind of like spinal nerve roots that are innervating those. It's not like a one peripheral nerve, so more simple just to say the attachments. So as we'll be palpating on one another the various bony prominences and identifying where the muscles are in the back, basically the neck and spine. And then also on Henry here, make sure that you've taken time to know he will be here for our exams, and he's fair game. He's my buddy. He likes to help however he can. So I can easily put a sticker on any part of the skeleton and say, that I won't be doing this because that's Cami. The muscle that originates here inserts where, or name this bony landmark, whatever it is. And it's something you should be able to do to count the levels of the spine to make sure you can go see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, T1 all the way down. So if I have a pin right here and I say, name this structure and the level, you could say it's the L5, 4, 3, 2, the L1, L2 zygapophyseal joint, or facet joint. So just make sure you can identify the levels, spinous process, transverse process, and so forth. So I may be able to bring in separate vertebrae models and or use Henry for different structures that we've gone over so far of the spine. We'll get to pelvis, hip, and knee and everything. So make sure you've spent some quality time with Henry. Never a bad idea. Okay, so the structure of the thoracic spine. We talked last week about all the mobility available in the cervical spine and how so there's kind of like the shoulder where there's a lot of mobility, there's less stability. And the bowling ball, if you will, the weight of the cranium on top of the cervical spine does allow a lot of function, allows us to turn our head all different directions, which we need to do to see. It allows us to communicate. We can nod or shake our head, all these different things. And then the thoracic spine is much more limited because of the thoracic cage and the involvement of all the ribs. Obviously, that's going to limit quite a bit of the movement in the thoracic spine. 12 separate vertebrae, they get bigger as we go down the spine. That's hopefully quite obvious. And then the lumbar vertebrae are bigger yet, all because of the load-bearing role that they play. And then important to understand that the way each rib articulates, yes?
Sorry, I
No.
don't want to forget my question.
Don't say sorry.
Next week you have the physical spine as well as the knee practical, so will spine be on the knee practical also?
Yes. Good question. Any others? Don't ever apologize and interrupt me. If I don't see you, say, excuse me. I'm never going to be, I'm more disappointed if you forget your question or too timid. So each of those ribs articulate with the spine with two levels, two vertebrae, right? So they kind of come into the vertebra above and below that rib. That's kind of how they form those demifacets. I think that's on the next slide. But a few different, as you see here, a few different landmarks, the angle, the shaft of the rib, the neck, the head. I wouldn't worry too much about that. Understand that the ribs, the way they articulate with the spine, as I just said, with the two vertebrae. And also important for many different reasons are every thoracic spine level, every rib, that's where an artery and a vein and a nerve, they follow the rib around, which has a lot of implications for injuries, right? If someone gets a blow and fractures a rib, there's the potential for involvement of these other structures. Anyone had a cracked rib? Yeah? How did I know? Shannon's like, I've had everything. But yeah, so very, very, very painful. I was on a snowboarding trip with a buddy of mine who really is tough as nails. I've never seen him even wince. And he fell in the half pipe and cracked a rib, and the guy was miserable. I remember him laying on the floor of our rented minivan for the 3-hour drive from Mammoth back to Reno. He's not a happy camper. So just his reaction let me know what I had already heard before was true, that it's very, very painful. So, okay. We talked about thoracic kyphosis quite a bit, right? That abnormal, there's a normal kyphotic curve in the thoracic spine, but there are times when it gets very exaggerated. And this has a lot of implications for respiratory function. When somebody has that fixed, enlarged, not the word, excessive kyphotic curve that really limits, we'll talk here in a minute about the way the ribs move and kind of that bucket handle. They really kind of go up and down as we inhale and exhale, and so that fixed deformity of the spine really limits respiratory function. So there are the demifacets and the costal facets, so that's kind of where those ribs come in and articulate with the vertebrae. And so, again, spend some time to come up and look at the at Henry or some other models. You have your Atlas. Have you guys looked at the iPads that have visible body on it? No, I saw it. They're going to?
No, we did this morning. We haven't seen that, but they like.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I saw an email from Dr. Anderson about those. But you can see there's kind of these 2 points of attachment. And if you come look at Henry, you can kind of see how that happens. On the previous slide, we have the tubercle here, and so then you have the head where it articulates. So up here you can see where it attaches to the two, kind of those two attachments, and then the angle of the rib right here has that attachment at the costal facet. So we talked before about chiropractic manipulations, and there are people who have a rib that quote unquote is out, and just a simple movement of a few millimeters up or down of these articulations can cause incredible pain. You talked about the nerve that's there, and so as we said, one rule of thumb, whenever the nervous system is angry, the whole body is going to try to protect that and resolve that. So a nerve that, that could be from a fall, even a really forceful sneeze can cause a rib to move out of those little facet articulations, and the nerve can get impinged and can cause inability to breathe because of that pain. Muscle guarding happens. It can be really bad. I don't know about all of you guys, but I've had some sneezes during my life that were so violent and aggressive that I'm surprised I survived them. And so I have a daughter, my third daughter, Rachel. Whenever she sneezes, everyone within the zip code knows she sneezed because it's like a sneeze yell. I don't know why she's always done that, but she screams her sneezes. So the thoracic vertebrae, we look at just the vertebral anatomy. A lot of similarities with the other vertebrae in cervical and lumbar spine. We talked about those superior and inferior demifacets. That's where the ribs articulate. And then these transverse processes have that costal facet. So now I have my laser. Oh, look, it works. Oh, wait, I always do the wrong button. No, that's the right button. Oh, there it is. It just doesn't show up on the TV. That's not helpful at all. Okay, so then the thoracic cage. So 12 pairs of ribs. Ribs 1 through 7 are true ribs. And they attach anteriorly with this costal cartilage. So right here with the sternum, and then ribs 8 through the first 7 have those attachments, and then 8 through 10, and then 11 and 12 have these others. So 8 through 10 are called false ribs, and they kind of, only because they don't have their own individual articulation, so they kind of come up and join their connections to the sternum. And then 11 and 12 have no sternal articulation at all. They just kind of end back here, 11 and 12. So they're just kind of floating in there. And then, of course, there are going to be anatomical variances. Some people don't have one of these 11th or 12th ribs, all different kinds of things. Okay, so the vertebral body, this is very similar to everything we talked about last week. I'm going to turn Henry around and back and forth. But the vertebral bodies have those same articulations with the zygapophyseal joints as inferior and superior facets. And then the costovertebral joints, that's where the rib comes into the vertebrae. Most things in anatomy, not all, but many things in anatomy are identified by their name. So if you can just remember the name, you can usually figure out where it's attaching. Okay, let's see. Important to point out, we already talked about anteriorly those costosternal joints. Important